October 1953. Ural Mountains. A freight train with boxcars slowly crawled along the mountain serpentine, skirting an abyss 200 meters deep. Inside one of the cars, behind bars, sat the transported prisoners, 40 people, being escorted to the Vorkuta camps. 30-year-old Vasily Kormelitsyn sat right by the wall of the car, listening to the rumble of the wheels. Each clatter counted down the seconds to his death. A slow, agonizing death in the camp where political prisoners were being taken for a 25-year term. Article 58, Paragraph 10. Anti-Soviet agitation. In reality, it was an incautious word spoken in the factory smoking room about how collective farmers lived worse than Tsarist peasants, reported by a dormitory neighbor. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. The sentence, 25 years. Vasily was a strong man, a former frontline soldier. He had gone through the entire war from Stalingrad to Berlin. He returned with orders and medals. He worked as a lathe operator at a factory in Chelyabinsk. He dreamed of a family, a home, a normal life. Now all that was over. Ahead lay only death, quick, if lucky, or slow in the mines of the Arctic. But Vasily made a decision that seemed like madness. He noticed that the guards were dozing. It was night, cold. The convoy was tired after several days of travel. The grate in the corner of the car was loosely secured. Someone from previous transports had tried to loosen it. Vasily quietly worked on it all night, using a nail found in a crack in the floor. Next to him sat a young guy convicted of theft. He saw what Vasily was doing and whispered, "You're out of your mind? You'll jump and smash yourself. We're going over an abyss. Better to smash myself than rot in Vorkuta. And if you survive the taiga, bears, cold, you'll die in a week." Then in a week, but free. The grate gave way. Vasily yanked it out. A hole the size of an adult's torso formed. Cold night wind rushed into the car. The convoy stirred, began to wake up. Now or never. Vasily squeezed through the hole, hanging on the edge of the car. Below him yawned a black abyss. The train was going along the edge of the cliff. Below, 200 meters down, a river glistened in the moonlight. "Stop!" yelled the guard, grabbing his rifle. But Vasily had already jumped. 2 shots rang out in the night, bullets whistled past, and Vasily Kormelitsyn's body fell into the darkness of the gorge. But to understand how an ordinary lathe operator from Chelyabinsk ended up in the transport car, ready to jump into the abyss, we need to go back 2 years, to the day when his life went off the rails. May 1951, Chelyabinsk. The Lenin metallurgical plant worked in 3 shifts, fulfilling the plan for steel production to rebuild the country after the war. Vasily Petrovich Kormelitsyn stood at his machine in the mechanical shop, turning a part for a rolling mill. He was 28 years old. Behind him was the war, a frontline wound, 2 orders of the Red Star, and a medal for courage. Demobilized in 46, he returned to his native Chelyabinsk, where before the war he had worked as an apprentice lathe operator. Now he was a master of his craft, earning a decent salary, living in the factory dormitory, saving for his own housing. He was looking at girls, thinking about marriage. Life was getting better. During the lunch break, Vasily went down to the factory cafeteria. At the neighboring table sat a group of workers from the foundry shop. They were lively discussing the latest news. "Heard? In the Red Plowman Collective Farm, half the harvest rotted. No one to harvest it. No equipment. Yeah, it's like that every year there. People are fleeing wherever they can. To cities, to factories. Who would work on a collective farm for Labor Day sticks? Under the Tsar, at least you had your own plot," interjected an elderly worker. "And now what? Everything taken away. Work for the idea." Vasily sat silently, finishing his porridge. The conversation was dangerous. Such topics were better not discussed out loud. But then his dormitory neighbor Semyon Krasnov, an activist and public figure, sat down at the table. "And what do you think, Vasil?" he asked. "Do you also think it was better under the Tsar?" "I don't think anything." Vasily got up from the table. "I have to get back to work." "Come on, say it, we're all friends here. In your opinion, are collective farmers worse off now or better than peasants under the Tsar?" Vasily stopped. The question was direct. To answer honestly meant saying dangerous words. To lie meant betraying his own convictions. "In my opinion," he said slowly, "working for Labor Days when the family is starving is worse than having your own plot, even a small one." Semyon nodded, smiled. Understood. Thanks for the honesty. Vasily didn't attach importance to that conversation then. Returned to the machine, finished his shift, went to the dormitory. And 3 days later, they came for him. May 15th, 1951, 3 a.m. There was a knock at the door of Vasily's room in the factory dormitory. Not a knock, a pounding with fists that made the windows rattle. Open up, police. Vasily jumped out of bed, his heart pounding wildly. A nighttime police visit meant only one thing: arrest. But for what? He hadn't broken anything, committed no crimes. He opened the door. On the threshold stood 3 men, 2 in police uniforms, the third in civilian clothes, with a cold face and empty eyes. An MGB employee, Kormilitsyn Vasily Petrovich, asked the man in civilian clothes. Yes, get dressed. You are detained on suspicion of anti-Soviet agitation. Anti-Soviet agitation? Vasily didn't even immediately understand what it was about. He hadn't engaged in any agitation, hadn't distributed leaflets, hadn't attended underground meetings. There must be a misunderstanding. I'm not guilty of anything. We'll sort it out. Get dressed quickly. They gave him 5 minutes to get ready. Vasily hurriedly put on his work clothes, took his documents. His roommate, that same Semyon Krasnov, lay on his bunk, turned to the wall, not looking, not saying a word. And then Vasily understood everything. The conversation in the cafeteria 3 days ago. The question about collective farms and czarist peasants. Semyon had informed. A simple, everyday denunciation like thousands in the country. They took him in a Black Maria, brought him to the MGB building on Kirov Street, took him down to the basement corridor with rows of iron doors. Cell number 12. 3 by 2 meters, bare walls, bunks, a slop bucket in the corner. The first interrogation began 3 hours later. The investigator, Major Kuznetsov, a man in his 50s with a tired face and indifferent eyes. There were many such investigators. They fulfilled the plan for solving crimes. It didn't matter if those crimes existed or not. Kormilitsyn, confess you conducted anti-Soviet agitation among the factory workers, called for the overthrow of Soviet power, praised the czarist regime. That's not true. I just answered a comrade's question, expressed my personal opinion. Personal opinion? The major smirked. We don't have personal opinions that contradict the party line. There is the correct position and enemy propaganda. Your words are propaganda. But I'm a frontline veteran. I fought for the motherland, was wounded. So what? Frontline veterans can be enemies too. Article 58 makes no exceptions. Interrogations went on every night. They didn't beat Vasily. The time of mass tortures had passed. After Beria's death, methods became softer. But the psychological pressure was worse than physical pain. Confess, Kormilitsyn, we have witness statements. He heard how you agitated against collective farms, against Soviet power. Sign the protocol, you'll get 5 years. Don't sign, we'll give you 25. What witness? Krasnov. He provoked me himself. The witness is a conscious citizen who fulfilled his duty to the state. And you are an enemy of the people. Enemy of the people. Those words sounded like a sentence. In 51, mass repressions were already waning, but the machine still worked. Enemies were needed. The plan for uncovering them had to be fulfilled. Vasily held out for 2 weeks, didn't sign the confession, didn't incriminate himself. But the investigator used another scheme. He fabricated the case based on Krasnov's testimony and 2 other witnesses whom Vasily had never seen. The trial lasted 20 minutes. The troika of judges didn't even listen to what the defendants said. They read the charges, the witness statements, pronounced the verdict. Kormilitsyn Vasily Petrovich is found guilty of committing a crime under Article 58, Paragraph 10 of the RSFSR Criminal Code. Sentenced to 25 years of imprisonment with confinement in special regime corrective labor camps. 25 years, he was 28, meaning he'd get out at 53, if he survived at all. And only a few survived in the camps. Vasily was sent to a transit prison, where he spent 4 months waiting for transport. The cell held about 40 people. Thieves, murderers, politicals, all mixed together. There he met an old prisoner nicknamed Dead. A political who had been in since 37, survived 3 camps, was on the brink of death, but survived. Listen, kid, Dead said. In the camp, the main rule is not to break in spirit. The body can die, but the spirit must hold. Otherwise, you'll turn into a goner and perish in a month. And how did you survive? I didn't survive. I've been dead for a long time. The body just keeps going. In October 51, they formed a transport to Vorkuta. Vasily and another 100 prisoners were loaded into freight boxcars. The long journey north began, to camps from which no one returns. Vasily Kormilitsyn spent 2 years in Vorkutlag. He worked in coal mines in the faces where the temperature dropped to -40 in winter. He saw people die from exhaustion, cold, accidents. They were buried in common pits, without crosses, without names. But Vasily held on out of stubbornness, out of anger at the system that had broken his life. He swore to himself that he would either get out of there or die trying. In September 53, he was transferred to another camp, even farther north, beyond the Arctic Circle. They were forming a new transport, and that's when Vasily made the decision that seemed like madness. He would escape at any cost, even if it meant jumping into the abyss. September 1953, Vorkutlag, Barak number 17, where political prisoners of special regime were held. Vasily Kormilitsyn lay on the bunks, staring at the soot-covered ceiling. 2 years of camp life had changed him beyond recognition. He had lost 20 kilograms, his face overgrown with a beard. His eyes had that special emptiness that comes to people who have seen too many deaths. But inside, a fire still smoldered: anger, hatred for the system that had turned him from a frontline hero into an enemy of the people for one phrase. Kormilitsyn called his bunk neighbor, a young guy named Solovyov. Heard the news? They're transferring us. Forming a transport beyond the Arctic Circle to Norilsk. Norilsk? Vasily sat up. That's a death sentence. Nickel mines. Yeah, they say survivability there is even lower than here. A year and a half and that's it. Norilsk was one of the most terrible camps in the Gulag. Nickel mines, permafrost, polar night. Temperatures down to -50. They sent the most dangerous politicals there for certain death. Vasily understood this was the end. In Norilsk, he'd last a year at most. He needed to act now while there was a chance. In the evening, when the lights went out in the barak, an old prisoner nicknamed Professor, a former history teacher sentenced to 10 years for a hostile lecture, sat down next to him. "Vasily, I heard you were at the front," the professor said quietly. "In reconnaissance." "No, in infantry, but I had to survive in encirclement." "So, you have experience." "Listen, I've been on 6 transports, I know the route. We'll go through the Urals. There's one section where the train goes over a gorge. Height of 200 meters, river below. And what? Well, some jumped. Out of 5, 1 survived, fell into the river. The current carried him away. The convoy didn't find the body. 1 out of 5. Vasily smirked. 20% chance. Better 20% than 0 in Norilsk. The professor was right. In Norilsk, there were no chances at all. The jump gave at least some hope. In the following days, Vasily prepared, gathered information from those who had already traveled this route, learned details. Where exactly the section over the gorge was, how the guards were positioned, what the grates in the cars were like. An old Zek nicknamed Ural, who had been in for 20 years and made 4 escape attempts, gave valuable advice. "Listen, Vasilyevich, if you jump and survive, don't go east. There are camps and settlements all over. Go west through the taiga. There's wilderness there, you can get lost. But the taiga is worse than the camp. Bears, hunger, cold. In winter, you'll freeze in one night if you don't make a fire. And how to survive in the taiga. Hunt, catch fish, gather berries, winter in abandoned huts. I lasted 3 months. Then they caught me. And why did they catch you? I went out to people, hunger tormented me. Thought they'd help, but they reported to the police." Ural taught Vasily the basics of survival in the taiga. How to start a fire without matches, how to build a shelter, how to find water, how to navigate by stars and sun. "The main rule," said the old Zek, "don't go out to people at all, never, because every person you meet is a potential informer. In villages, they'll run to the village council first thing." On October 5th, they announced boarding for the transport. 40 people from Barak number 17, all politicals, all with long terms. They lined up, searched, loaded into boxcars. Vasily deliberately positioned himself to get into the car where the grate was weaker. The professor had tipped him off on the number. In the car, there were 42 people and 4 guards. The train started. The long journey across the country began from Vorkuta to Norilsk, more than 3,000 kilometers. But Vasily wasn't planning to go all the way. On the second day, when the train entered the Ural Mountains, he started working on the grate. Found an old nail in a crack in the floor. Used it as a tool. Worked at night when the guards dozed. His bunk neighbor, the young guy Solovyov, whispered to him, "You're really out of your mind? You'll jump and smash yourself? Maybe, or maybe I'll survive. And if you survive the taiga, you won't last a week there. Then at least I'll live a week free. That's better than 20 years as a slave." On the third day, the grate began to give way. A little more and he could yank it out. Vasily felt the tension building. Soon the section over the gorge. The moment of truth soon. In the evening of the fourth day, the professor said quietly, "Tomorrow night, the section over the Chusovaya River. Big height but deep river. If you hit the water, there's a chance. And if not, then it'll end quickly, you won't have time to get scared." That night, Vasily didn't sleep, running the plan over and over in his head. Yank out the grate, squeeze through, jump, make it before the convoy starts shooting. The chances were minimal, but they were chances. In the morning of October 5th, the train entered the most mountainous part of the route. Outside the windows flashed rocks, gorges, abysses. Far below, a silvery ribbon of the river could be seen. Vasily approached the grate. His heart pounded so hard it seemed everyone in the car could hear it. One last yank and the grate would come out. October 5th, 1953, 11 p.m. The train slowly crawled along the mountain serpentine, skirting the abyss. Vasily Kormelitsyn stood by the grate, feeling the cold wind bursting through the cracks in the car. Outside was pitch darkness. The moon was hidden behind clouds. Only vague outlines of rocks and the distant gleam of the river below were visible. The guards were dozing. For guards, tired after several days of travel. The senior sergeant snored in the corner. Two juniors sat with their heads thrown back against the car wall. The fourth, very young, could barely keep his eyes open. Now or never. Vasily grabbed the loosened grate firmly, yanked with all his might. The metal gave way, creaked, another yank, and the grate flew out, crashing onto the floor of the car. The sound was loud. The young guard jerked up, grabbed his rifle. "What's that?" But Vasily was already squeezing through the hole. The sharp metal edges tore his clothes, scratched his skin. He pushed his head, shoulders, torso through. "Escape!" yelled the guard. "Stop!" Vasily hung on the edge of the car. Below him was emptiness, black, bottomless. The wind tore at his clothes, whistling in his ears. The train was going at about 40 kilometers per hour. Slow for a train, but deadly fast for a jump. "Stop! I'll shoot!" The guard raised his rifle. Vasily pushed off and jumped into the darkness. A shot rang out right over his ear, then a second. He felt the bullets whistle centimeters away, but he was already falling down into the void. Time stretched. Seconds turned into eternity. He flew in the darkness, heard the whistle of the wind, saw stars flashing overhead. His whole life flashed through his head. Childhood in a Ural village, war, front, return home, arrest, camp, and then impact. Vasily crashed into something hard, flipped over, rolled. Branches whipped his face, stones battered his body. He tumbled down the slope, grabbing at anything, trying to stop. Finally, he stopped, catching on a large boulder. He lay there, unable to move, listening to the train rumbling in the distance. The sound gradually faded. Silence set in, broken only by the noise of the river below. Alive, he was alive. Vasily carefully moved his arms, legs. Everything worked. His left leg hurt like hell, probably a sprain or bruise. His face burned from scratches. His ribs ached, maybe broken or just badly bruised. But the main thing, he was alive and free. He got up, leaning on the boulder, looked around. The darkness was impenetrable. Where was he? On the slope of the gorge, that was certain. He needed to descend to the river, find shelter there. The descent took more than an hour. Vasily crawled, clinging to bushes and rocks, slipped several times, rolled down, finally reached the riverbank. The water was icy, a mountain river fed by glaciers. He drank, washed the wounds on his face and hands. The pain was bearable, but he had to endure. Now he needed to decide where to go. To the east were camps, populated areas, people. To the west, dense taiga, hundreds of kilometers of wilderness. Vasily remembered the words of old Ural. Don't go to people, go into the taiga. There's a chance to get lost there. He went west, upstream along the river. He spent the first night in a crevice between rocks. He couldn't light a fire, no matches, and smoke could attract attention. He shivered from the cold, wrapping himself in his thin camp quilted jacket. At dawn, he heard the sounds of a helicopter. The convoy had raised the alarm. The search began. Vasily hid under an overhanging rock, not moving. The helicopter circled over the gorge for about an hour, then flew away. So they didn't find the body. They'd think he smashed himself and the current carried the corpse away, or that he drowned. In any case, they wouldn't search for a live person. No one survives a jump from such a height. Thus began his 9 years in the taiga. The first month was the most terrifying. Vasily didn't know how to get food, how to navigate, how to survive. He ate berries, of which few remained in October. He caught fish with his hands, clumsily, unsuccessfully. He starved. After 2 weeks, he found an abandoned hunter's hut. Tiny, half fallen apart, but with a stove and remnants of a roof. In the corner lay rusted traps, an old knife with a broken blade, a coil of rope. This was treasure. The knife could be used for butchering game, traps for hunting, rope for snares. Vasily learned to set snares for hares. He caught the first one after a week, scrawny, mangy, but it was food. He roasted it over a fire, ate with the greed of a hungry wolf. Gradually, he adapted, learned to catch fish with homemade spears, set traps for martens and squirrels, find edible plants. But the most terrible enemy was the cold. October in the Ural Mountains was harsh. Temperatures at night dropped to -10, and ahead was winter, real winter, with frosts down to 40. He needed to prepare for wintering, repair the hut, stockpile firewood, hunt meat and dry it in the stove. Vasily worked from dawn to dusk, understanding that if he didn't prepare in time, winter would kill him. In November, the first snow fell. November 1953, Ural Taiga. The snow fell suddenly and abundantly. In one night, it covered the ground with a thick white blanket. Vasily Kormilitsyn woke up in his hut from an unusual silence, that special silence that comes only after the first snow. He looked outside. The world had changed. Everything around was white. Trees stood dusted with snow, like in a fairy tale. But for Vasily, this was no fairy tale but harsh reality. Winter had come, and now survival would be even harder. In a month and a half in the taiga, he had turned from a camp goner into a wild man. He grew a thick beard, his hair matted into tangles, his face weathered, covered with scars from scratches, his hands roughened from constant work, his clothes turned into rags, which he patched with sinews and bark. But the main thing, he had learned to survive. The snares reliably caught hares. In a month, he got 8. Traps brought martens and squirrels. Fish in the river were still catchable, though with the cold, they went deeper. The stock of dried meat and cured fish grew. He repaired the hut as best he could, caulked the cracks with moss, reinforced the roof with poles, stockpiled firewood. A whole stack that should last the winter. The stove heated reliably, though it smoked. But with the first snow came new problems. Tracks. Now every movement left clear prints in the snow. If someone wandered into these parts, hunters, foresters, geologists, the tracks would lead straight to the hut. Vasily became more cautious, walked on animal trails, where his tracks got lost among elk and boar prints. He circled the territory to confuse possible pursuers. December brought real frosts. Temperatures dropped to -30. Vasily hardly left the hut. Heated the stove, ate supplies, mended clothes, sewed himself a hat from hare skins, mittens from squirrel skins, made primitive but warm footwear, like unts from hides. One night he heard howling, drawn-out, eerie wolves. Pack passed nearby the hut. Their tracks were visible in the snow later. Vasily realized he needed a weapon. Traps and snares were good for small game, but useless against wolves or bears. He began to make a spear, found a straight pole, whittled it with the knife, attached a sharp stone to the end, tying it with sinews. Turned out primitive but formidable. January turned out to be the hardest. Frosts reached -40. Firewood ran out faster than he calculated. The stove consumed them at an incredible speed. Vasily realized the supply wouldn't last until spring. He needed to stock more, but chopping trees in such frost was torturously hard. Food was also running out. Hares almost stopped getting caught in the snares. Either there were fewer of them or they became more cautious. Winter fishing didn't work at all. Stocks of dried meat were melting. In mid-January, Vasily, for the first time in 2 months, decided to go far from the hut in search of game. He took the spear, went upstream along the river, walked all day, sinking into snowdrifts, freezing. He found a place where elks came to drink, set up an ambush, waited 3 hours, almost frozen from the cold. Finally, a young elk appeared. Vasily threw the spear with all his might. The strike was accurate. The animal bolted, but couldn't go far. The chase was short. Soon Vasily caught up with the prey. This was his first major victory over hunger. The meat would last a month. But how to get the carcass to the hut? It was 15 kilometers away. The elk weighed about 200 kilograms. Vasily butchered the carcass right there. Took the most valuable parts, liver, heart,
hind legs,
hid the rest in the snow. Covered with branches, he'd get it later. Dragged the meat on homemade sleds from poles, which he tied together. He reached the hut late at night, barely alive, but with meat. Lots of meat. Now he could make it to spring. February passed more calmly. The elk meat gave strength. Firewood still smoldered in the stack. Vasily even began planning for summer. Where to set up a garden, what crops to plant, how to improve the dwelling. But in early March, an event happened that nearly cost him his life. He left the hut early in the morning and saw smoke. A pillar of gray smoke rose from behind the forest about 3 kilometers from his shelter. So, people there, geologists, hunters, or worse, a special MGB group combing the taiga for fugitives. Vasily gathered the essentials, ready to flee at any moment, and in the evening saw a campfire. Closer than in the morning, people were coming his way. March 1954. Vasily Kormilitsyn hid in a dense spruce grove 100 meters from his hut, watching the approaching lights. People were walking through the taiga with lanterns, and their voices carried through the frosty air. He gripped his spear, ready to either flee or fight. The group emerged onto the clearing in front of the hut. 4 men in warm sheepskin coats, with backpacks and geodetic instruments. Geologists. They were looking for a place to spend the night and stumbled upon the hut. "Look at that," said one young guy with a goatee. "A hut? I thought it had collapsed long ago. Strange." Another, older one, approached closer. "Smoke coming from the stove. Someone lives here. Hunters, probably." "Hey, anyone there?" shouted the third. Vasily froze. To show himself meant answering questions. Who is he? Where from? Got documents? And there were no documents, and his face was surely in the wanted notices. Fugitive prisoner, Article 58, especially dangerous. But if he didn't show himself, they'd enter the hut, see his things, realize someone lives here permanently, start searching and find him. There was only one way out: pretend to be a local hunter hermit. Vasily came out of the forest, holding the spear so as not to look threatening, but to show he wasn't unarmed. "Good evening," he said in a hoarse voice. After months of silence, his vocal cords had forgotten speech. The geologists flinched, turned around, saw a wild man in animal skins with a long beard and matted hair. One even grabbed for a gun. "Who are you?" asked the senior. "Hunter, live here, alone in such wilderness?" "Alone. I like the quiet." The geologists exchanged glances. The senior, named Pyotr Vasilyevich, was an experienced taiga man. He had seen all kinds in the forests: hermits, old believers, and fugitive zeks. Now before him was clearly someone hiding from the world. "Maybe let us in for the night?" he asked cautiously. "Frost is getting stronger, and our camp is still 20 kilometers away." Vasily hesitated. To let them in meant revealing his secret. Not to let them arouse suspicion. Besides, refusing travelers shelter in the taiga was against unwritten laws. "Come in, but it'll be cramped." The geologists entered the hut, looked around, saw the primitive life. Skins on the bunks, homemade utensils, dried meat under the ceiling. No documents, books, personal items. How long have you lived here? Asked the young geologist, taking tinned meat from his backpack. 2nd year, lied Vasily. Before, I was in a village, then decided to go to the forest. And from which village? Far to the south, don't remember the name anymore. Pyotr Vasilyevich watched Vasily attentively. His experienced eye saw that before him was no ordinary hunter. The hands weren't right, not calloused from years of work. They had long been covered with calluses. The speech educated, though trying to sound simpler. And most importantly, fear in the eyes. This man is afraid of something. But Pyotr Vasilyevich was a wise man. He understood that in 53 various people could be hiding in the taiga. After Stalin's death, amnesty began. Many were released, but not all. Politicals were still sitting, and some preferred to escape rather than rot in camps. All right, he said. We won't pry into your soul. Everyone has their own truth. The night passed quietly. The geologist slept on the floor. Vasily on the bunks, not closing his eyes. In the morning, the guests prepared to leave. Thanks for the shelter. Pyotr Vasilyevich handed Vasily a pack of makorka and a box of matches. Here, useful for the household. Thanks. And also, if you need anything, we'll be working here another month. Our camp is 20 kilometers north. Come if you need help or food. We won't refuse. Vasily nodded, not believing it was possible. Help from strangers. In his world, there had long been no place for kindness. When the geologists left, he stood at the window for a long time, watching them go. The first encounter with people in 5 months ended unexpectedly well, but it was dangerous, very dangerous. The following week, Vasily lived in constant tension, expecting the geologists to return with the police. But no one came. April brought the long-awaited thaw. Snow began to melt, patches appeared. Vasily emerged from winter hibernation, began preparing for spring. He needed to expand the household, set up a garden, stock up for the next winter. He found a place for the garden, a clearing with good soil, dug it with a homemade shovel from a board and stick. Where to get seeds? He remembered. The geologists offered help. Risky, but no other way. In early May, Vasily went to the geologist's camp. Walked all day, hiding at the slightest rustle. The camp turned out to be large. Several tents, a trailer, warehouse with equipment. He watched from afar until he saw a familiar figure. Pyotr Vasilyevich came out of the tent. Vasily whistled quietly. The geologist turned, saw him at the edge of the forest. Approached alone, without witnesses. Ah, hunter, what brings you? Need seeds for the garden. Got anything? Pyotr Vasilyevich smirked. Seeds, huh, settling in? Settling in. Wait here. He returned in 10 minutes with a little bag. Here, potatoes, carrots, onions. Enough for a small garden. Thanks. What can I repay with? Nothing, just live. If asked, we never saw you. Understood? Vasily understood. This man knew or guessed who he was and kept silent. Moreover, helped. Why? Because he didn't believe in the justice of the system that made people enemies for words. Go and don't come here anymore. Dangerous. That was the last meeting. A month later, the geologists packed up camp and left, and Vasily remained with the seeds, which he planted in his garden. The summer of 54 became a time of settling in. He built a new hut, bigger, stronger, expanded the garden, hunted, fished, stocked food for winter. But most importantly, he realized it was possible to live in the taiga for years, decades. Just caution and patience. The first year ended. Ahead were another 8. Summer 1955, the second year of Vasily Kormilitsyn's life in the taiga. He stood by his garden, looking at the first shoots of potatoes. The seeds given by the geologist Pyotr Vasilyevich had sprouted. Green sprouts pushed through the soil, a symbol of hope, a symbol that here one could not just survive but live. In a year, he had changed beyond recognition, turned from an urban lathe operator into a wild taiga dweller, learned to read animal tracks, predict the weather by bird behavior, find edible plants. His hands were covered with thick calluses. His body became sinewy and strong. His beard grew to his chest, hair matted into long tangles. The hut also transformed. He built an extension for supplies, made a cellar, where vegetables and meat were stored, built a smokehouse for fish, expanded the garden to decent size. Now potatoes, carrots, onions, even cabbage grew there, seeds of which he found in an abandoned village 20 kilometers away. Yes, a village. He stumbled upon it in spring, when he went on a long reconnaissance. Small, about 10 houses, completely abandoned. The residents had left it back in 47, fleeing hunger and hopelessness. The houses stood empty, with broken windows and collapsed roofs. But for Vasily, this was treasure. He found tools there: axe, saw,
Amme, nails, dishes, pot, bowls.
mugs, clothes, old quilted jackets, felt boots, mittens. He carried everything to his place gradually over several trips. The most valuable find was a book. A single book, forgotten in an abandoned hut. A collection of Jack London stories. Vasily read it countless times, to tatters, until he knew every word by heart. It was his connection to the human world, to civilization, to culture. The second winter passed easier than the first. Supplies were sufficient, firewood enough, clothes warm. Vasily even allowed himself a luxury, carved chess pieces from wood and played against himself. It helped not to go mad from loneliness, because loneliness was the most terrible enemy. Worse than cold, worse than hunger, worse than bears. Months without hearing a human voice, without seeing a human face. Talking only to himself or to the ravens that perched on the hut's roof. Sometimes at night, Vasily woke up screaming. Dreams of camps, guards, interrogations. Woke up in a cold sweat, not understanding where he was. Then remembered, in the taiga, safe, free, and fell asleep again. Summer 1956 brought an unexpected encounter. Vasily was fishing on the river when he heard voices. Male voices, speaking Russian, but with some strange old-fashioned accent. He hid in the bushes, watching. Along the bank walked 3 men in homemade clothes with long beards and staffs. Old believers. Vasily had heard that, in the remote places of the Urals, old believer communities still lived, hiding from Soviet power since the 20s. The eldest of the 3, an elderly man with a gray beard to his waist, stopped, sniffed. Smells of smoke. Someone lives nearby. Maybe hunters? Suggested the middle one. Not hunters. Constant smoke means a settlement. They followed the smoke trail straight to Vasily's hut. He hurried there through the forest, arrived first. Met them at the threshold. Good day, wanderers. The old believers stopped, examining the wild man before them. Good day, brother. Who are you? Hunter, live here. Alone. That's not right. A man should live in community with brothers in faith. They got talking. The old believers turned out to be from Mesquite, located 40 kilometers away in the deepest wilderness. Community of 20 people, men, women, children, lived by old laws, did not recognize Soviet power, hid from the world. Come to us, offered the elder, Father Pimin. You'll live with us, work, pray. Better than alone in the forest like a savage. Vasily refused. Living in community meant obeying rules, answering questions, telling about the past, too dangerous. But the old believers began to visit from time to time. Brought bread, salt, sometimes honey. Vasily reciprocated with game or fish. Thus, an unspoken exchange was established. Once Father Pimin said, I know who you are, a fugitive from the camps. I've seen such. You have a camp walk, a camp look, but we won't turn you in. For us, Soviet power is the enemy. The enemy of our enemy is our friend. This was honesty Vasily didn't expect. He told his story. Not all, just the main parts. Arrest, sentence, escape. 25 years for words. Father Pimin shook his head. Yes, power is from the devil, but hold on, son. God sees your sufferings. Someday true freedom will come. These meetings with the old believers saved Vasily from complete savagery. At least sometimes he talked to people, heard news from the outside world, fragmentary, distorted, but still news. That's how he learned that in '56 there was the 20th Party Congress, where Khrushchev exposed Stalin's cult of personality, that they began releasing political prisoners, rehabilitating the repressed. Maybe they'll forgive you too, said Father Pimin. Maybe you can return? But Vasily shook his head. Escape from transport, that's a separate article. They were looking for him as an especially dangerous criminal. Even if rehabilitated on the main charge, for the escape they'd give a new term. Summer 1957 was the happiest in all the years in the taiga. The garden gave an excellent harvest. Hunting was successful. He got 2 roe deer and a bear. Yes, a bear. The beast came right to the hut, tried to get into the cellar. Vasily managed to defeat it with a homemade spear. It was an incredible battle between man and beast, in which he miraculously survived. But the victory was worth it. Bear meat, fat were worth it. He tanned the skin, sewed himself a warm fur coat. Meat lasted half a year. Melted the fat, used for cooking and lighting. Winter 57 passed calmly. In spring 58, an event happened that nearly destroyed everything. May 1958. Vasily was working in the garden when he heard distant engine roars. Helicopters. Several helicopters flew over the taiga, methodically combing the territory. A raid, searching for someone, maybe him or another fugitive. He hid in the forest, watching. The helicopters circled all day. One even landed in a clearing a kilometer from the hut. Soldiers with dogs disembarked, began combing the forest. Vasily buried all traces of his activity, hid the most valuable in a cache. He himself went deep into the taiga, taking minimal supplies. For 3 days he hid in the forest, eating bark and berries, not daring to light a fire. On the 4th day, the helicopters flew away. The raid ended. Who they were looking for, unknown but didn't find. Vasily returned to the hut. The soldiers found it, searched but found nothing special. An ordinary hunter's hut, like hundreds in the taiga. They decided temporary hunters stopped there. But this was a warning bell. Raids happen, so need to be even more cautious. Have a backup shelter in case he has to flee the hut. The following years went steadily. Summer, garden, hunting, fishing, preparations. Autumn, harvest, drying mushrooms and berries, preparation for winter. Winter, survival, repairs, making tools. Spring, recovery after winter, hut repairs, start of a new cycle. Year after year. 1959, 1960 to 1961. Vasily lost track of time. Notches on the beam by the door helped track the years, but days merged into one endless day. He changed, outwardly turned into a wild forest man, whom his own mother wouldn't recognize. Inwardly became different, calmer, more patient, wiser. Learned to live in the present moment, not thinking about past and future. But the scariest, he began to forget. Forget faces of people from past life. Forget voices, names, events. Memory erased, like pages of an old book. Sometimes at night, he tried to remember his mother's face. Couldn't. Tried to remember a friend's voice? Couldn't. Past life turned into a blurred dream, and then something happened that changed everything. Autumn 1962 brought an encounter that nearly cost Vasily his freedom and life. October 1962, the 9th year of Vasily Kormilitsyn's life in the taiga. He walked along a forest trail with a caught hare over his shoulders, returning to the hut after morning trap checks. Autumn was early and cold. The first snow already lay on the ground. Vasily thought about the upcoming winter. Final supplies needed finishing, firewood brought up, roof patched. He didn't notice as he came out onto the familiar clearing and froze. By his hut stood a man. A middle-aged man in military uniform with a backpack on his back. An officer. He was attentively examining the structure, touching the walls, peering into the window. Vasily's heart sank. A military man here in the wilderness at his shelter. Coincidence, or were they looking for him? He wanted to turn and leave, but the officer turned his head. Their eyes met, too late to hide. "Hey," called the military man. "Come here." Vasily slowly approached, trying to assess the situation. The officer was alone, no weapon in sight. Face tired.
Non aggressive.
Captain's epaulets. "You live here?" asked the captain. "I do." "Hunter, alone." "Alone." The officer looked at Vasily intently. His eyes suddenly widened, his face changed. He stepped closer, peering into the face of the wild man before him. "Lord Kormilitsyn, Vasily Kormilitsyn." The world stopped. Time froze. He was recognized. After 9 years, through the beard and dirt, through the changed appearance, he was recognized. Vasily instinctively grabbed the knife at his belt. Run. Fight. But where to run? And why fight if this man already understood everything? "I not," began he, but his voice broke. "It's you, Vaska, I recognized you. My God, it's really you. The captain took another step, and Vasily saw his face clearer. Something familiar. Features he had seen before long ago in another life. You don't remember me? The captain took off his cap. Lyoka Gramov, we were together at the front. Petrova's company, Stalingrad. The memory surfaced from the depths, like a bubble of air from underwater. Lyoka Gramov, the machine gunner from their company. A lanky kid who always joked even under fire. They stormed the station in Stalingrad together, broke through encirclement near Kursk together. Lyoka, croaked Vasily, you're alive? Alive and you're alive. Lord Vaska, we thought you died. In 53, a message came, died during transport. Smashed. That's how it was planned. They stood, looking at each other. Two front comrades who hadn't seen each other for 9 years. One a Soviet army officer, the other a fugitive Zek living in the taiga like a savage. Let's go inside, said Lyoka. We need to talk. In the hut, Vasily lit the stove, put on a kettle with water. He had no real tea, but a homemade herbal drink. Lyoka examined the dwelling, shaking his head. 9 years. 9 years alone in the taiga. How did you survive? Got used to it. And what are you doing here? Got lost doing topographic survey, fell behind the group, looking for the way back, came to your hut. They were silent. Then Lyoka asked, tell me what happened? Why are you here? And Vasily told, everything from arrest to escape, from first winter to today. Spoke long, pouring out what had accumulated for 9 years. Lyoka listened silently, only sometimes shaking his head. Article 58 for words in the smoking room, he finally said. Yeah, times were crazy, but now many have been rehabilitated. Khrushchev exposed Stalin's cult, canceled many sentences and the escape for escaping transport. Not necessarily. They might consider the circumstances. Unjust sentence, desperation. They might close the case altogether. Vasily shook his head. They won't. The system doesn't forgive escapes. To them, I'm a criminal regardless of whether I was guilty or not. Lyoka took a flask of vodka from his backpack, poured into mugs. To the meeting, to both being alive, they drank. The vodka burned Vasily's throat. He hadn't drunk alcohol in 9 years. His head spun almost immediately. Listen, Vaska. Lyoka leaned closer. I won't turn you in, word of honor. To me, you're a front comrade, a brother. You saved my life near Stalingrad, remember? Pulled me out under fire. Vasily, remember? Vaguely, but remember. Lyoka was wounded by shrapnel, and Vasily dragged him through the snow under bullets to the aid station. I'll go back to my people, continued Lyoka. Say I got lost, found the way myself. Not a word about you. But listen to me. You can't live like this forever. Another year or two and you'll completely go wild. Forget human speech, human habits, become an animal. Better an animal in freedom than a man in a cage. But there's another way. I can help. I have connections. I can make inquiries, find out about your case. Maybe really possible to get rehabilitation? And how will you do that without drawing attention to the fact that I'm alive? Lyoka thought, don't know but can try. Give me time. A year, maybe 2. I'll dig in the archives, talk to the right people. If I find a way to close the case, I'll come here, tell you. And if not, then at least you'll know that we tried. Vasily looked at Lyoka with a long gaze. Trust. After 9 years of distrust of the entire human race, suddenly trust. And if you turn me in, accidentally or on purpose, tell someone that one tells another, gets to the organs, won't turn you in. I swear by the memory of fallen comrades, won't turn you in. I swear by the memory of the fallen, that was sacred for frontline soldiers. Such a swear isn't broken. All right, Vasily said slowly. Try. But if something goes wrong, I'll come warn you. You'll have time to leave. They sat all evening, recalling the front, pre-war life. Fallen comrades. Lyoka told how the country changed, about space conquest, about Gagarin, about the Caribbean crisis unfolding right now, about the world balancing on the brink of war. For Vasily, these were news from another reality. Space, Cuba, missiles. Everything seemed fantastic. His world was limited to the taiga, the hut, the change of seasons. In the morning, Lyoka prepared to leave. I'll be back, he said goodbye. In a year, maximum 2. Wait for me in October. If I don't come, means it didn't work. And if it works, then you can return to people to normal life. I've already forgotten what normal life is. You'll remember, a person remembers everything if he wants. Lyoka left. Vasily stood at the window for a long time, watching him go. For the first time in 9 years, he was given hope, tiny, ghostly, but still hope that this imprisonment would end someday. The next year passed in agonizing waiting. Every time hearing steps in the forest, Vasily flinched. What if it's Lyoka or the police that Lyoka told after all? But no one came. Neither Lyoka nor the police. Only the old believers visited from time to time with their bread and news. Autumn 1963. October. Vasily waited, checked the trail every day, but Lyoka didn't appear. A week passed, then 2, then a month. Vasily understood. Lyoka wouldn't come. Either couldn't do anything or didn't want to risk, or something happened to him. The hope that had smoldered for a whole year went out. Vasily resigned himself. He would spend the rest of his life in the taiga. Die here when the time comes. His body would be found by hunters or torn apart by animals. No one would know who he was. Just a nameless skeleton in an abandoned hut. But at the end of November, the impossible happened. November 1963, end of the month. Vasily Kormilitsyn was chopping firewood by his hut, preparing for another winter, the 10th winter in the taiga. He was 40 years old, but looked all of 60. Face furrowed with wrinkles, beard completely gray, back bent from hard work. The axe rose and fell monotonously, mechanically. Vasily didn't even think about what he was doing. His thoughts were far away. About Lyoka, who never came, about the hope that died, about life turned into endless existence. He had become different over these years. Almost forgot how to speak. His voice sounded hoarse. Words came with difficulty. Forgot many things from past life. Street names of his native city, names of school friends, even his own mother's face erased from memory. Sometimes he caught himself thinking he was becoming an animal, sniffing the air, determining the weather, listening to forest sounds, distinguishing the slightest changes. Moving silently like a predator, the human was leaving, the animal coming in its place. Suddenly he heard a sound. Strange, unfamiliar. Not wind noise, not crack of branches under animal paws. Human steps. Several people walking along the trail to the hut. Vasily froze, axe frozen in the air, heart pounding. Who is it? Old believers usually didn't come so late in autumn. Hunters, geologists, or from behind the trees appeared figures, for men. In front walked a familiar silhouette, Lyoka Grimov, now not captain, but major by epaulets. Behind him 3 in civilian clothes. By their bearing, attentive eyes and wary faces, Vasily immediately understood. Organ employees. They found him. 10 years of freedom ended. Vasily slowly lowered the axe, straightened up. Running pointless. For against 1. They're younger. They surely have weapons. Resisting would only make it worse. Lyoka stepped forward, raised his hand in a conciliatory gesture. Vaska, don't be stupid. We didn't come for that. Not for that. Vasily's voice sounded hoarse. Then why show me a new cell? One of the men in civilian, a man in his 50s with an intelligent, tired face, stepped forward. Kormilitsyn Vasily Petrovich. I'm senior investigator of the Sverdlovsk Region Prosecutor's Office, Mikhailov. We're not here for arrest. Then for what? For a talk. Can we go inside? Vasily hesitated, then nodded. They entered the hut. The investigator looked at the primitive dwelling, shook his head. 10 years here. How did you survive? Got used to it. Lyoka took a bottle of vodka from his backpack. Bread, cans. Vaska, I kept my promise. Searched for a year for a way. Found it. Your case was reviewed. Reviewed. Vasily couldn't believe his ears. The investigator Mikhailov opened his briefcase, took out a folder with documents. As part of the rehabilitation of victims of political repressions, your case was pulled from the archive. Studied the investigation materials, witness statements, sentence. The whole case was fabricated from start to finish. The only witness, Krasnov himself, confessed in '56 that he slandered you on the instruction of the MGB investigator. Needed to fulfill the plan for uncovering enemy agitation. And what? By a special commission of the USSR Supreme Court, you are fully rehabilitated. Sentence cancelled. Conviction removed. You are a free man, Vasily Petrovich. The words didn't fit in his head. Rehabilitated. Free after 10 years free. And the escape for escaping transport. The escape committed in a state of desperation after an unjust sentence. Considering the circumstances, the prosecutor's office decided not to initiate a criminal case. You are officially recognized as deceased in 53 during an escape attempt. From a legal point of view, Vasily Kormilitsyn died 10 years ago. Then who am I? Mikhailov took out another document. This is a certificate of rehabilitation and restoration of rights. With this certificate, you can get a new passport, restore documents, return to normal life. Vasily took the certificate with trembling hands, read, not understanding half the words. Legal terminology, stamps, signatures. Everything seemed unreal. I'm free. Really? Really? Lyoka put his hand on his shoulder. You can return to Chelyabinsk, get a job, get an apartment, live like a person. The second man in civilian, a young guy about 30, added, you're even entitled to compensation. 10 years of unlawful imprisonment, that's a substantial sum. You can buy good housing, settle in. Vasily sat, looking at the certificate. Freedom, real official freedom, what he dreamed of for 10 years. Return to people, to civilization, to normal life. But what is normal life? He forgot. Forgot how to be with people, how to live in the city, how to use money. Forgot everything. I can't, he said quietly. What Lyoka didn't understand. Can't return. I am no longer a person. I lived here 10 years. I forgot how to be a person. Mikhailov leaned forward. Vasily Petrovich, I understand your fears. But there, in the city, they'll help you. There are special rehabilitation programs for those who were in confinement long. Doctors, psychologists, they won't abandon you. And if I want to stay here?
Silencer hum.
Everyone looked at him in bewilderment. Stay, repeated Lyoka. Are you serious? You dreamed of freedom for 10 years, and now when they give it, you refuse? I'm free here. Understand? Here I owe nothing to anyone. No need to pretend, smile, play roles. Here I just live. The third man in civilian, an elderly man with gray hair, spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but very serious. Listen to me, Kormilitsyn. I'm a doctor, psychiatrist. I work with people who experienced long confinement. What you're going through is called social maladaptation syndrome. You lived 10 years in isolation. Your psyche adapted to this life. Returning to society seems scarier to you than loneliness. But this is illness. It needs treatment. I'm not ill. Ill? You've forgotten. Human speech, human habits. Another year or two here, and you'll completely degrade, become an animal in human form. Irreversible. Vasily was silent. The doctor's words were true, and he knew it. Felt how with each year the human in him died. Thoughts became simpler, more primitive, memories disappeared, emotions, desires. And if I return, what awaits me? A city I don't know, people I don't understand. I'll be a stranger among my own. At first it'll be hard, agreed the doctor. Very hard, but gradually you'll adapt. Remember skills. Learn to live again. You still have time. You're 40, not old age. Lyoka sat next to Vasily. Vaska, I didn't search for you for nothing. I remember what you were like. Cheerful, alive, full of plans. Remember how you dreamed of family, home, normal life. Do you really want to die here in this hut, alone like a beast? Maybe I do here peacefully. This is not peace, this is death. Slow death of the soul. They sat in silence. Outside the window, snow fell, the first serious snow of winter. A new cycle began. Winter, spring, summer, autumn. The 10th cycle for Vasily, or maybe the last. Mikhailov spoke again. Vasily Petrovich, you have every right to stay here. We can't force you to return. But think carefully, this is a decision for the rest of your life. If you refuse now, later it'll be too late. The system won't repeat the offer twice. And what if I decide later, say in a year? The rehabilitation certificate is valid, but help in adaptation, compensation, housing, this is provided now. In a year, you'll be on your own. Formally free, but actually remain here forever. Vasily stood up, went to the window, looked at the falling snow, recalled his whole life from beginning to this moment. Childhood in a Ural village, school, factory, war. Return, arrest, camp, escape. 10 years in the taiga, 2 lives. One among people in society with its rules and lies. The other here in the taiga in solitude but honest. Which to choose? How much time do I have to think? He asked, not turning. Until morning, answered Mikhailov. We'll stay here overnight. In the morning, you'll say your decision. Either come with us, or we leave and don't return. The night was sleepless. Vasily lay on his bunks, listening to the guests snoring on the floor. Thought, weighed, imagined both lives, the one awaiting him there, and the one here. Returning meant plunging into a world he didn't understand. City, apartment, work, neighbors, lines in stores, meetings at the factory. Need to smile when you don't want to. Speak when there's nothing to say. Pretend to be normal, though inside emptiness. Staying meant continuing existence here. Hunting, fishing, garden, change of seasons. Loneliness, gradual degradation. Turning into an animal. Death in this hut when time comes. Nameless grave in the forest. Which option is scarier? He remembered the words of old Ural from the camp. Main thing not to break in spirit. Body may not hold, but spirit must hold. His spirit held for 10 years. But what next? How much longer would it hold? And then remembered something else. Remembered reading the book by Jack London, the only book he had here. The story Love of Life. About a man surviving in the wilderness, but not giving up. Crawled to people, to civilization because he was human. Person shouldn't live like a beast. Even if the system broke him, even if the world seems hostile, a person must remain human to the end. When dawn broke, Vasily made his decision. Morning of November 30th, 1963. The first rays of sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the snow-covered taiga. Vasily Kormilitsyn stood at the hut's window, looking at the world that had been his home for 10 years. The guests woke up. Mikhailov, Lyoka, the doctor and another employee gathered things, preparing to leave. Everyone looked at Vasily, waiting for the answer. Vasily cleared his throat. Voice sounded hoarse. I'll go with you. Lyoka jumped up, hugged him. Right decision, Vaska. Right. But I'm afraid. Vasily looked at him seriously. Afraid I won't manage, that I'll break there among people. The psychiatrist put his hand on his shoulder. Fear is normal. It would be abnormal not to fear, but you'll cope. You have iron will since you survived here 10 years. That will help survive there too. Before leaving, Vasily walked around the hut one last time. The cellar where winter supplies lay, the garden dusted with snow, the smokehouse, the woodpile. Every corner of this place held memories of years of survival. He took with him only the essentials. Knife, homemade flint, Jack London's book. Left the rest. Let the hut serve someone else. Hunters, geologists, fugitives. At the threshold he stopped, turned. 10 years of life remained in these walls. 10 winters and 10 springs. Joy of first successful hunt. Despair of first hungry winter. Loneliness of endless nights. All here, goodbye, he said quietly and closed the door. The way to the nearest settlement took 2 days. Walk through taiga, then dirt roads. Vasily barely moved his legs, unaccustomed to long marches in open terrain. In the taiga, he moved cautiously, silently, like a beast. Here needed to walk fast without looking back. The geologist settlement met them with generator noise, spotlight light, human voices. For Vasily, this was a deafening cacophony after 10 years of silence. He covered his ears, winced at every sharp sound. People looked at him like a ghost. A wild man in animal skins, with gray beard to his waist, with lost gaze. Some whispered, pointed fingers. Don't pay attention, said Lyoka. They'll get used to it. The first night in the settlement, Vasily didn't sleep. Lay on a real bed under a real blanket, in a warm room and couldn't fall asleep. Too warm, too soft, too quiet. Accustomed to cold, hardness, to sounds of night taiga. In the morning he ran outside, lay on the snow by the porch, fell asleep there. The next stage was the city of Sverdlovsk, a large industrial center. They brought Vasily there by helicopter. His first flight in life after the war. He sat, clutching the seat, looking down at the land passing below. Taiga, mountains, rivers. Everything seemed toy-like from height. In Sverdlovsk, they placed him in a special clinic for rehabilitation of former prisoners. Private ward, doctors, nurses examined from head to toe. The diagnosis was discouraging. Chronic exhaustion, avitaminosis, multiple old fractures, improperly healed, arthritis of joints, problems with teeth half-needed removal, lungs damaged from cold and smoke, vision weakened. But the worst was with the psyche. The psychiatrist, the same one who came to the taiga, conducted a long examination. "You have pronounced social phobia," he explained. "Fear of people, society, plus post-traumatic syndrome from camp, plus consequences of long isolation. Treatment will take years, and if not treated, you won't be able to live among people. You'll snap, return to the taiga or worse." Vasily began treatment. Everyday talks with psychologists, group sessions with other former prisoners, attempts to remember how to be human. The hardest was communication. Vasily had forgotten how to talk. Words came hard, sentences choppy. He was silent for hours, and when tried to speak, voice sounded hoarse and uncertain. "It's temporary," calmed the psychologist, a young woman named Anna. "Speech skills will recover. Just need to practice." She made him read aloud, tell about his life, describe objects. At first it was torturous, but gradually the tongue loosened, harder with emotions. Vasily had forgotten how to feel joy, sadness, anger. Everything dulled over years in taiga. He looked at the world with empty gaze, not reacting to events around. "You built a wall around yourself," explained Anna, "to protect from pain. But this wall doesn't let in joy. Need to learn to feel anew." Winter 63 turned into spring 64. Vasily gradually adapted, learned to sleep in bed, eat at table, talk to people. Grew a new beard, but neat. They sewed him normal clothes. In spring, they discharged him from the clinic, gave documents, compensation for years of unlawful imprisonment, helped find work. Placed as lathe operator at factory, the same specialty as before war and arrest. Got a room in a communal apartment. 12 SQM, shared kitchen, neighbors behind the wall. After taiga, this seemed unbearable cramped, but it was home. First months at factory were hell. Noise of machines, shouts of foremen, crowds of people. Vasily shied from every sharp sound, flinched at touches. Colleagues looked askance. Strange one, silent, not like everyone. But hands remembered the work. Lathe craft returned. Machine worked smoothly, parts came out precise. Foreman was pleased, though surprised by new workers' silence. Lyoka visited regularly, came in evenings, brought vodka, talked about life. Rather, Lyoka talked, Vasily mostly silent and listened. "You know," said Lyoka once, "I'm proud of you. Not everyone could return after 10 years in taiga. You're great, Vaska. Don't know if I did right. Sometimes want back to taiga. There it was simpler. There wasn't simpler, there it was lonely. And here you live, really live." Summer 64, Vasily smiled for first time after return. It happened unexpectedly. Walking in park, saw children playing ball. One boy fell, cried. Mother picked up, comforted, and something stirred inside Vasily. Warm, long-forgotten feeling. Joy. Simple human joy for a stranger child who stopped crying. He stood, looking at the scene, and tears streamed down his face. First tears in 10 years. In autumn, met a woman. Zina Ida, widow of a frontline soldier, worked as librarian. Quiet, calm, understanding. She didn't ask extra questions, didn't pry into soul, just was there. They walked in park, talked about books, weather, life. Vasily, for first time in many years, felt something like attachment. "You're strange," said Zina Ida once, "but I like it. There's something wild in you, but honest." "I lived 10 years in taiga," he confessed, "alone like a savage." "I know," Lyoka told, "but not details, only general. Will you tell someday? Maybe when I can." Winter 64 passed calmly. Vasily got used to city life, work, home, walks with Zina Ida. Simple, everyday life which he dreamed of in camp. Spring 65 they married. Modest wedding. Only closest. Lyoka was witness. Old believer, Father Pimen, whom they found through connections, secretly married them by old right. Vasily had a family, real family. Zinaida turned out patient wife, who understood his silences, his strangeness, his nightmares. Didn't demand impossible, just loved. Years went by. Vasily gradually became normal person. Learned to talk freely, though not verbose. Found friends among factory colleagues. Stopped flinching at sharp sounds. But taiga remained in him forever. Every summer he went to forest, not that wilderness where he lived 10 years, but ordinary forest near city. Set up tent, lived a week or two in nature. Zinaida understood he needed it. "You'll return," she asked before each departure. "I'll return, always return." And returned because learned the main thing. You can love the taiga, but need to live among people. In the 70s, they had a daughter, late child, but long awaited, named Anna in honor of the psychologist who helped Vasily return to life. The girl grew and Vasily told her tales, unusual ones, his own. About bears and wolves, about taiga and survival. Anna listened, holding breath. "Dad, is this true? You really lived 10 years in forest alone?" "True, daughter? And why?" "Because no choice, but now there is. And I chose you, you and Mom." 80s brought perestroika, glasnost, opening of archives. Vasily wrote letter to prosecutor's office, asked to fully declassify his case. Wanted people to know truth. His story got into newspapers. 10 years in taiga. Confession of former Zek. Article read across country. Vasily received letters. Hundreds of letters from people who survived repressions, from their children and grandchildren. "You're heroes," they wrote him. "You proved that a person can survive in any conditions." But Vasily didn't feel like a hero, just a man who did what he had to do. Survived, returned, remained human. In 91, when Soviet Union collapsed, Vasily went to that area where he lived 10 years, found his hut. Stood, half-ruined, overgrown with moss. Inside everything rotted, only stove blackened in corner. He stood at threshold, remembering 10 winters, 10 springs, hunger, cold, loneliness, but also freedom, strange, wild freedom of a man who belongs to no one but himself. "Thank you," he said to the empty hut. "Thank you for saving me." Vasily Kormilitsyn lived a long life, lived to 2007 to 84 years. Died at home surrounded by family, wife, daughter, grandchildren. Before death, told daughter, "Remember main thing, a person remains human not because lives among people, but because preserves humanity in any conditions. In camp, in taiga, in city. Anywhere you can remain human or become beast. It's each one's choice." Buried him in city cemetery. On monument engraved Vasily Petrovich Kormilitsyn. From, to 2007, frontline soldier, lathe operator, man who lived 10 years in taiga and returned to people. His life story became legend. Books written about him, documentary film made. Hut in taiga turned into pilgrimage site for tourists. But most importantly, his story reminded people. System can break fate, but can't break spirit. A person who wants to remain human will remain so even in the most inhuman conditions. Vasily Kormilitsyn jumped into the abyss to gain freedom. Lived 10 years as a savage in the taiga and returned to people, proving true freedom is not in running from the world, but in preserving oneself in this world. His life ended, but memory of it lives, and will live as long as people remember. Survival is not just preserving the body. It's preserving the soul, humanity, dignity. Even when the whole world is against you, even when it seems easier to become a beast, remain human, because that's what distinguishes us from animals. Not reason, not speech, not tools, but the ability to preserve humanity in inhuman conditions.